Though we explore tales of the strange but true, you may find this next story hard to believe. Despite its status as a well-documented case with a large number of eyewitnesses, its mystical nature conjures an endless array of questions and opens a door to a world unexplored. It's the kind of reality-bending tale that leaves you a slightly different person than you were before. Where you currently stand matters not. It's what you allow yourself to believe in the end that lives on. I'm DreyOfTheDead, and it's time to feed your head. The life of Mary Roff seemed to be filled with misfortune almost as soon as it began. In 1846, at the tender age of 6 months, she began experiencing the first terrifying symptoms of a strange and unknown illness. Seizures that caused her body to go rigid for hours. Catatonic states of sleep that left her motionless for days at a time. In search of a cure for their daughter, Asa and Ann Roff moved from state to state, finally settling in South Middleport, Illinois. There, they built the first house in a town that would eventually become known as Watseka. Over the years, Mary's seizures grew in both frequency and severity. Despite the odds, she remained a brilliant child and a skilled pianist, often playing solemn tunes that echoed her sorrows. As a teenager, Mary became preoccupied with bleeding herself in an attempt to relieve what she called a lump of pain in the head. In a time where bloodletting was common, doctors prescribed her leeches to ease the tension. Mary grew fond of these creatures, often treating them as pets as she applied them to her temples. On July 16th of 1864, Mary's self-harm reached a dangerous turning point. Slipping a knife into the backyard, she cut deep into her arm, resulting in significant blood loss, and fell unconscious for hours. When she woke up, she became hysterically violent and made further attempts to harm herself. In fact, it took 5 men to subdue the 100-pound Mary. Mary remained in this frenzied state for days until waking one morning as if none of it had happened. Things seemed normal again. Almost. You see, Mary no longer recognized the presence of people around her. And though her eyes were open, she wasn't using them to see. Her parents further confirmed this by heavily blindfolding her and watching in amazement as she went about her day unfazed. She walked around the house with ease, searched through drawers, and pinned up her hair, all without the use of vision. She could even read better than she had before. As you might expect, this garnered Mary a lot of attention, including that of local newspaper editor A.J. Smith, Reverend Rhea, and several other prominent citizens of the town. Blindfolded before them, Mary was able to sort through a box of letters from friends and read each one without error. The men skewed her letters, removing some and adding their own. Without any hesitation, Mary picked out the letters that were not her own and violently threw them away. And it didn't end there. To test her abilities, a skeptical Smith brought his own letter to the Roff home. He held it before Mary, asking her to read the signature from beyond the sealed envelope. And Mary did just that. During this time, both Mary's seizures and strange abilities continued to escalate. She heard voices and carried on long conversations with people no one could see. On July 5th of 1865, while her parents were away on vacation, Mary was heard screaming from her bed. By the time help arrived, a seizure had already taken her life. She was 19 years old. But despite her tragic end, this would not be the last time the Roffs would hear from Mary. Just 2 years before Mary Roff's death, Watseka welcomed another Mary. Her full name was Mary Lurancy Vennum, or Rancy for short. Though most of her childhood was considered average and uneventful, at the age of 12, she began to hear disembodied voices calling her name. One day, she turned to her mother with fear in her eyes. "Ma, I feel bad." Lurancy collapsed and her body went rigid for hours. Lurancy began to experience fits that would render her unable to move but allow her to speak with ease. And what she had to say was beyond belief. She described in striking detail a number of spirits within her sight, including that of her late brother and sister. In fact, over the next 2 months, Lurancy had a number of existential episodes in which she described heaven and the angels. She also experienced severe stomach pains that caused her body to wrench backwards until her head touched her feet. Her physicians, relatives, neighbors, and even the family's Methodist minister believed her to be insane and recommended that she be sent to an asylum. As it often does, word of Lurancy's condition spread, prompting spiritualists from all around to come and witness the girl. One of these was Dr. E. Winchester Stevens, who was recommended by a neighbor of the Vennums to see if he could help. With the neighbor in tow, they found the girl crouched in a chair by the stove, silent, sullen, and distant. When she did speak, she warned the men not to come any closer. Stevens asked her name. "Katrina Hogan," she answered, a foul-mouthed 63-year-old woman from Germany. Her posture shifted. "Willie Canning," a local runaway who had recently died. Willie began aggressively interrogating Stevens on his religious beliefs and propensity towards drinking, smoking, and other vices. After an hour, Lurancy collapsed into another trance and began describing all of the entities in the room. Stevens then asked her to bring forth a gentler spirit. After months of wild, unpredictable, and unruly behavior, Lurancy suddenly became rational, polite, and even a little timid. Her gaze turned towards the neighbor. "Hello, Pa." The spirit at the helm now was Mary Roff. Since the tragic death of their daughter, the Roffs themselves had become spiritualists, seeking to understand the otherworldly from Mary's point of view. As neighbors to the Vennums, Asa Roff couldn't help but notice the similarities between their daughter's conditions. Naturally, he felt a deep sense of guilt for what happened to Mary. Upon hearing that the Vennums were preparing to institutionalize their daughter, he pleaded with the family not to make the same mistakes he had. He told them of his own daughter's supernatural experiences and the torturous treatment she experienced in the state asylum. And now, here she was before him. The girl had little recognition of her own parents and pleaded with Mr. Roff, "Just take me home." Over the next week, she continually expressed to the Vennums that she wanted to be with her family. She explained that Lurancy had become quite ill and would be taking some time to recover in heaven. Considering their own inability to manage their daughter, the Vennums allowed Lurancy to stay with the Roff family. Upon meeting her older sister Minerva and her mother Anne, she excitedly referred to them as Ma and Nervy, names that hadn't been referenced since her death in 1865. Despite Mr. Roff's skepticism, Mary seemed to pick up where she left off just 12 years ago. She recognized extended family and friends by name and reminisced about things they had done together. When greeted by former neighbor Mrs. Wagoner, she referred to her as Mrs. Lord, the last name of her previous husband before Mary's death. In her spare time, Mary could be found playing her favorite old songs on the piano. She asked for her famous box of old letters, spoke of her own burial, and described times when the Roffs had summoned her through various mediums. Once asked by Dr. Stevens about her self-inflicted wounds, Mary pulled up her sleeve to show him the scars, and then realized her mistake, stating, "This is not the arm. That one is in the ground." Asa often tested the girl by asking her questions about Mary's life, to which she replied with information only Mary could know. In one instance, he left out a velvet headdress to see if she would recognize it. When Mary saw it, she exclaimed, "Oh, this is the headdress I wore when my hair was short." Though Mary treated them as distant acquaintances, the Vennums occasionally visited their daughter's vessel and watched in wonder as her health improved. During her time with the family, Lurancy's body played host to a number of spirits. In seances, she channeled deceased family and friends and made reference to Dr. Stephen's late children. One night, among many guests, Mary left Lurancy's body to inhabit a visiting man, proved her presence through wit and logic, laughed at the now empty vessel of Lurancy, who she left leaning against a friend, and then promptly returned to her host. In another instance, Mary urged her family to watch over her brother Frank. He was going to be very sick, she said, and would die if not properly cared for. This came as a shock to her family, as her brother seemed quite healthy. That night, Frank was gripped by spasms and severe congestive illness. Mary called upon her father to reach Dr. Stevens, who arrived in time to treat Frank and ultimately saved his life. On May 7th, after 15 weeks with the Roth family, Mary took her mother aside and told her that Lurancy would soon be ready to return. Just then, a visible shift occurred, and the girl suddenly seemed lost and afraid. "Where am I? I want to go home." Though Mary was able to return, Lurancy's presence began to come in waves for the remainder of her time with the Roth family. As her sister recalled, during the end of Mary's stay, she often clung to her parents, sometimes to their annoyance. When they asked why, she responded, "I want to kiss you while I have lips to kiss you with, and hug you while I have arms to hug you with, for I am going to heaven before long, and then I can be with you only in spirit, and you will not always know when I come, and I cannot love you as I can now." During her final days with the family, Mary spent time with each relative, holding them, weeping with them. Beyond bittersweet goodbyes was a shared gratitude for a second chance that never should have been. On May 21st at 11 o'clock, Lurancy returned, referenced Asa as Mr. Roth, and asked that he take her home. Lurancy went on to live a fairly normal life. She married in 1882 and moved to Kansas with her husband. Her family never spoke of Mary again for fear of invoking her return. Regardless, Mary occasionally took control of Lurancy's body throughout the years, much to her husband's dismay. Lurancy went on to give birth to 11 children, each time shielded by Mary from the pain of labor. Over the years, a number of reporters, investigators, and psychologists delved into the case of Lurancy Vennum, some confirming Dr. Stevens' findings and some attempting to discredit the reports. Claims of impersonation, secondary personalities, and telepathy abound. For those who witnessed it themselves, the case is undeniable. Whatever you choose to believe, the Watseka Wonder stands as America's first documented case of spiritual possession. Prior to her death in Los Angeles in 1952, Lurancy visited the Roth family, and at their request, allowed Mary to come home one last time. If you enjoyed this strange tale, you'll definitely enjoy previous episodes here on YouTube. And if you don't want to miss out on future episodes, which premiere every 2 weeks, be sure to subscribe. If you're a fan of blooper reels and behind-the-scenes content, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be well and stay strange.